Hello, today we're going to talk about comparing linear equations. So first thing I want you to do is to pause the video and try these two warm-up problems. When you're done, come back and check out the answers. Okay, for the first one, anytime we have 2 points, the first thing we want to do is find slope. So we're going to do 9 minus 3 over 5 minus 2. We have to line up those x and y values, right? And so this gives us 6 over 3, which gives us a slope of 2. We know y equals 2x plus b. Now I don't know what b is, so I have to plug either one of these points in to figure out what it is. If I were to plug in 5, 9, I would get 9 equals 2 times 5 plus b. So b plus 10 equals 9, or b equals negative 1. So I think my equation is y equals 2x, y equals 2x minus 1. Now, if I want to be really thorough, what I can do is I can plug in my other point. I can plug in 2, 3 and see if that still works, because we know that this line has to work for both points. So if it works for the first one, it'll have to work for the second. So 3 equals 2 times 2 minus 1. Is that true? Yes. So we know that our equation for that first pair of points is going to be, so y equals 2x minus 1. Okay, for the second one, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to do negative 9 minus 2 over 7 minus negative 4. So on top, I'll get a negative 11, and on the bottom, I'll just get 11. So this gives me a slope of negative 1. Now, if I want to write a slope of negative 1, I'm going to just essentially write it as negative x, because we really know that we'd have a negative 1x, but we don't really need to write the 1. Just like if I have x equals 5, I don't write 1x equals 5. So our next step is to plug in a point. Let's go with negative 4, 2. So 2 equals negative times negative 4 plus b. So that means that b plus 4 is equal to 2, so b equals negative 2. And so from here, I know my equation should be y equals negative x minus 2. Now, if we want to double check this, what we can do is plug in our other point. So let's plug in 7 comma negative 9. So is negative 9 equal negative 7 minus 2? Yeah, that's true. So this is my other point. Okay, and so for our final question, in case you didn't see it, it says, which has a steeper slope? So for something to have a steeper slope, steeper means that it has the greatest, let me slide this down, steeper means the greatest absolute value of the slope. Now, absolute value means whatever we take in, your teachers will also tell you it's the distance away from 0, which is true. What we do when we take an absolute value of a number, we essentially just, whatever sign it is, positive or negative, it comes out the positive version of that number. So we had a slope of 2, and the absolute value of 2 is 2. And we had a slope of negative 1, and the absolute value of negative 1 is 1. So we say which one had the steeper slope? Well, the first one, right? This had our steeper slope. And if we wanted to, we could graph these two lines, and we see that one essentially rises or goes lower quicker than the second line. So because the absolute value of 2 is greater than the absolute value of negative 1, it has a steeper slope. Okay, so because we're doing these in videos, I'm going to try to essentially break these up into smaller bite topics, so that way you guys can essentially look at one thing at a time, do some practice, and go back to it. Whereas if we were meeting in person, we'd have to essentially hit a couple topics at a time. I'm going to try to break it up into some shorter ones. Okay, so here we're going to be looking at steeper slope. And remember that steeper means essentially we're dealing with the steeper is the greatest absolute value. So we got to keep that in mind. We don't actually care which one's like more positive. We're going to deal with the absolute value. In our first one, we take the absolute value of 3 and we get out 3. And then we take the absolute value of negative 6 and we get out 6. So we know that it's going to actually be our second one. 6 is greater than 3, therefore the second equation has the steeper slope, meaning that essentially it'll move down quicker than the other one moves up. Okay, for our second one, what we're going to do is take the absolute value again. And this one's going to be a little bit harder because we're dealing with improper fractions, right? So maybe we don't know right off the bat that the second one or first one's better. So let's try to convert these into mixed numbers and see if that gives us a little bit of a clearer picture. So we get 1 over 1 4/7 and 1 4/5. Well, I know that if it has a smaller denominator, it's actually going to end up being that bigger fraction. The numerators are the same, and so this has to be our bigger one. So we're going to get, again, our second one having a steeper slope. Okay, so for these next problems coming up, they're all word problems. The first one, I will be honest with you, the first one's pretty tricky. But after that, it doesn't get quite as bad. What I would suggest you do is try these out and come back with answers. And you can, or if you get stuck, just say, okay, I'm going to play the video now. But if I were you, I would pause and see how many of these you can do, but always feel free to come back and see what we're doing, right? Again, remember, this is a learning process, so understand that some of these are going to be pretty tricky. Okay, so our first problem, I do want to remind you that you will have access to a calculator. So be aware of that. Also remember that these are actually going to be 7th and 8th grade EOG problems, but we're reviewing them because these are probably like the hardest case scenarios we could have when comparing either slope or y-intercepts of linear functions. So I think you've read the problem already. Essentially what's happening is that you get a fixed salary, which means that that's going to be our y-intercept. So this fixed salary is our y-intercept, meaning that no matter what we sell, we'll get this amount of money. We don't know what it is, but we're going to figure it out. So we're given two coordinates here. We're given 15,000, comma 2,550, and then we're given 25,000 and 3,050. And so our goal is to try to figure out what is the fixed monthly salary, meaning that we're solving for the y-intercept. So this one's more like a linear word problem, and we're going to treat it just the same. We're going to do 3,050 minus 2,550 all over 25,000 minus 15,000. Okay, so that gives us 500 on top and 10,000 on the bottom. And I'm getting a little cramped here. Let me try to erase some of this. Okay, and so now we can simplify that down. So the easiest way for us to simplify that down is cancel out the zeros, and we're left with 5 over, this should be at 10,000, 5 over 100, which is 1 over 20. So that is our slope. Our slope is going to be 5 over 100 or 1 over 20, meaning that essentially Kyle is getting 5% of his sales. Y equals 1 over 20x plus b. And our goal, like I said, is to find out what b is. So now we plug in either point. So I'm going to plug in February. So I get 3,050 equals 1 over 20 times 25,000. And again, guys, we have calculators. Don't be afraid to use them here. So I get 3,050 equals 1,250 plus b. So b, by subtracting over, I get is 1,800. Meaning that each month, his fixed salary is going to be 1,800. And there we go. All right, moving on to question 2. Should be a little bit friendlier. It says beginning in 2000, well, you can read. So the ticket price is $48 in 2005 and $55.50 in 2008. So notice how it says beginning in the year 2000. that actually tells us that we're going to convert this to a 5 and this to an 8. So doing that makes my life a little bit easier because now when it says how much does the ticket price cost in 2000, it's saying what does the ticket price cost at 0? Meaning essentially, again, what is the y-intercept? What is the y-intercept? Let's try that out. Remember, we talked a little bit on the last video about the fact that it's always going to be years, comma, money, or time, comma, something else. So we're going to write these points as 5, comma, 48 and 8, comma, 5550. And so let me subtract those two and find our slope. Again, the big thing we want you to take away here is no matter what, we can always, always, always find slope. So the slope is going to be 250. Now, if we want to, see now we have decimals in here, you might be just saying, oh no, Mr. Erb, you always said leave your answer as an improper fraction. I totally agree with that a majority of the time. So maybe always is a bad word because in this case, it's really easy for me to just leave it at 2.5 because again, I care about that y-intercept. So now what this tells us, what this means is that the slope increases by $2.50 every year. Let's make that clear. This is an increase in $2.50 per year. It's important for us to understand that. You will be asked about what is the meaning of slope in the context, right? Talking about rate of change here, but we also need to just understand what does slope mean in the context of a problem. So now I'm given another point. Well, I'm given this point, and I have to try to figure out what the y-intercept is. So I go 48 equals 2.5 times 5 plus b. So b plus 12.5 equals 48, or b equals 35.5. So what that tells us is how much did a ticket cost in 2000? Well, it cost $35.50. So we know if we were to add 250 each year past that, we would end up getting to where we wanted to. For example, if I take this and essentially say, well, hey, 2005 was 5 years after, and I'm going to add 250 each time. 5 times 2.5 is at 12.5 plus 35.5. And that gets us $48. If we want to check again, let's add another 3 years of that, or 7.5, and we end up getting, in 2008, tickets were $55.50. All right, remember guys, I want you pausing the video and trying these problems out before we go over. If you can't solve a problem or you get stuck, that's a great time to watch the video. But again, we want you to try these and see where you're at. No matter what, we'll always have practice at the end, so be aware of that. So we're given company P with that equation, and this tells us that essentially the charge per hour is $30. So it's a $30 charge per hour, and the initial rental fee is $50. Meaning that if I were to just rent from this company but don't actually use it, which doesn't really make a whole bunch of sense, but let's say I were to use it for 1 minute, then what would end up happening is we'd owe that $50 and then plus 1/60 because 1 minute times 30. Now company R didn't give us an equation, so we need to figure out what the equation is for R. But first we want to look at what our statements say. We're essentially trying to figure out the charge per hour, right? Charge per hour. So it's essentially asking us for the slope. So if it's asking us for the slope, I don't actually care about this initial amount. I just care about how much it goes up per hour. So we have 2 points. Let's rewrite these as 2 points. And some of you might have just said you can find the slope without having to do this. That's totally okay. However you want to do it is fine. So we get 125 minus 100 over 2 minus 1, and that'll give us 25 over 1, meaning that company R charges $25 per hour. So if company R charges $25 per hour and company P charges $30 per hour, who's charging more? Well, company P is. They charge $5 per hour more. So we're looking at B. Now, we don't necessarily have to actually figure out what, we don't have to worry about the y-intercepts, but if we wanted to, we could do some quick work and realize that y equals 25x plus 75 is the actual equation for R. Let's assume that you can see the 5 over there. Let's try to move that. 75. And so we actually see where they get this other answer of the 25 less. They're looking at the y-intercept, which isn't what we want to look at. All right, the next one. They want the distance between the y-intercepts, meaning they essentially want us to subtract our y-intercept. The y-intercepts. So we know that the y-intercept in the first problem is 4. We don't know what it is in the second one. So I'm going to pick these first two. You can pick whichever ones you want, but I'm going to use those to find my slope. And so I'm going to do 32 minus 17 over 5 minus 2. And this gives me 15 over 3, which is a slope of 5. So y equals 5x plus b. And then from there, what we're going to do is actually find what the y-intercept is. So let's plug in 2 comma 17. Put that over here. We're going to plug in 2 comma 17. So 17 equals 5 times 2 plus b. And so b plus 10 equals 17. So b is 7. So if b is 7, we have our equation as y equals 5x plus 7. So the distance between the y-intercepts would be 7 minus 4, which is 3. Now some of you may say, well, Mr. Erb, what if I did 4 minus 7? I got negative 3. Well, two things. One, we know negative 3 is not an answer, so we don't have to worry about that. But two, we could essentially say that what would end up happening here is we're looking at distance. We're kind of looking at almost like the absolute value. We're just trying to see how far apart they are. So we're not actually caring about that it would be negative. We're just looking to see where we get. Okay, so in this problem, we're just looking at the, we're essentially trying to figure out the line that would connect Town Hall. So Town Hall's right here. That's the point, let's look at it as 5 comma 6. We're connecting Town Hall to the post office. Post office is negative 3 comma 7. So the first thing I want to do is look at my answers, and most of them aren't great. We could figure out a couple of things. First of all, we know if our post office to the town hall is happening, we're essentially we should have a negative slope, right? Because the post office is higher up than the town hall. So we can get rid of C and D because we want to have a negative slope. The next thing we're going to do is actually find the slope. So we're going to do 7 minus 6 over negative 3 minus 5, which gives us 1 over negative 8, or negative 1/8. So if we wanted to stop there and be a little cheeky, we could essentially say, oh, hey, this is a slope of negative 1/8. It's got to be B. But let's figure out and make sure that that y-intercept is also true. So we're going to say that y equals negative 1/8. Y equals negative 1/8. X plus B. We're going to plug in 6 for y. I don't know why it's doing that. 6 for y and 5 for x. And so 6 equals negative 5/8 plus b. And I'm going to change the 6 to get a common denominator with an 8 and make it 48 over 8. So the reason I want to do this is because I know my next step is to add 5/8 to both sides. and so b is 53 over 8. And we're good. We know we did it correctly. We could also approximate 53 over 8 and get that to be a little bit less than 7, which we see is where our y-intercept should hit, right? We're essentially 3/8 off from that. That's the end of this lesson. I want you guys trying out the problems. Again, email me or comment any questions you have. Be aware that we're going to I'll have some extra practice on the wiki as well, so that way you guys can see um, what you guys need more help with. Remember, comparing means we're just going to be looking at the slopes and see which one's steeper, or look at the y-intercepts, see which one's greater. You saw some of the problems that we did today dealing with essentially finding the difference between them. That's kind of the same thing that we're looking at. Or which one costs more or less per pound. That kind of all falls in the realm of comparing linear functions. So have a good day and try out the practice. Let me know if you have any questions. See ya.